If you hear anything today,
Make sure it is this.
tag along for the deep dives in gaming and movies, music, and much more.
So, wherever you are, relax and join us for the Red Pony Podcast. Good evening, good morning, and wherever you are, hope you're having a wonderful day and welcome to our latest episode. Today, we're going to talk about the concept of gore. So, my name is Joshua Butcher, and I'm joined with my friend and good colleague, Peter. Floria, how are you today, mate?
Pretty good. I'm all right. Yeah.
It's good to have us back in the same Zoom call here to have a podcast episode because it's been a while.
Yeah. The reason why we haven't recorded for a while is mainly my fault because I went on vacation and I didn't have access to good internet. I didn't have my microphone with me, so yeah. But yeah, I'm back home now, so we should be able to record again.
And you look absolutely tanned in a little more so than
no,
usual.
I don't.
So
I still look white as fuck.
you're still a nice
skin.
chicken breast there, but
Yeah, exactly.
no, well, you had a lovely time. I've still been vacating in my humble abode in England, which hasn't been so nice. Of course, the weather's sometimes pleasant, but that all aside, let's straight away get onto our concepts because I'm excited to talk about this, to be honest, because it's something that I don't think we really plan to do, but we kind of started talking about concept talks where we would mention a particular point that's in a film and we would just address it and think about it in deeper detail, like why is it used, perhaps what are its impacts, and what does it do for the consumer. These kinds of questions we want to beat around, right, and see where it leads. And if you are listening on Spotify or YouTube, you probably can see the artwork that we've put up for this, so get some ideas for where this may go. Now, Pete, I want to ask you, where should we kind of start our journey in discussing gore? Because there's obvious points you could travel to.
Right. Well, I feel like we can split it into sections. I feel like in movies, TV shows, and games, gore is utilized in actually quite a different way. The reaction to gore is different, and it's just a completely different universe of gore for all three sections. So maybe we should start with movies, because I feel like that's the one which you can compartmentalize most easily. Yeah,
I agree. Okay, so let's take it in turn. So with movies, the way I've been thinking about this over the last few days since we said we'd talk about this is you kind of have three sets of films or three sets of categories of films where it's kind of the sole front and purpose of the film, why you watch it. Let's take Saw, for an example, or perhaps Hostel. You then have the entertainment side of it, where it's kind of composed in a very creative fashion. I would also include Saw in this to a degree, but it's also films that are like Evil Dead, that are like, I would say Stitches is a niche example of it.
The one that I can think of which most fits this is something like Deadpool or the Suicide Squad or stuff like that.
So it's not purely, sorry to interrupt, but it's not something that purely rests on a horror genre. It can be into the action adventure. It could be
exactly.
Comedic.
I think the entertainment faction part of it is specifically for more like action movies or something of that sort, where the gore is used for comedic effect sometimes, and also just to have a fun experience, to see how far you can take it in creative ways, like how it's done in the Mortal Kombat film as well sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good example too. And then for me, my third category, so like just to recap, I've got the first category where it's the front and sole purpose of the
shock
movie.
value. Yeah.
Shock value. And the second one is where it's entertainment, either comedic, adventure, or action.
Yeah.
And the third one for me is more nuanced, where it's put in very sporadically and occasionally to evoke an emotion or a response. And the prime example, and this is because I rewatched this recently, was John Wick 3, where during one fight scene, he approaches the guy, and I think it's in the antique shop, and he penetrates his eyeball. And that's like one example. It doesn't have to be there, but it's done for go ahead, man.
That reminds me of something else from the first John Wick. There's the part where they're at the spa section of the club, and he grabs this guy and he pins him against the wall and shoves a knife like up here, and he looks him in the eyes as he falls down, and you see the blood splatter behind. And that, once again, that shows something about the ruthlessness and the cold heart of John, actually. So I think basically what this section is where the violence is used to evoke either an emotion or to provide us with information about the character. So
Yeah, maybe even to the world as well, the world building.
Yeah.
It could be to show just how dark everything could be, and that kind of thing too. So with those, that's for me how I would categorize gore in movies. I wanted to hear what you think. What's your take on that? And maybe you have a different view.
I think that's exactly right.
I'm just trying to think if we missed anything.
Well, there's one which is part of the third section, which the one about evoking an emotion. There's also Quentin Tarantino talked about this. There's cathartic violence as well. I feel like that's part of that section, but it's a little bit different in that cathartic violence. It's to make the audience, like, if to like, let's say you're murdering people who are really despicable in the film, and let's say the main character has been wronged and he's getting revenge basically. That's a different type of violence, which is supposed to evoke an emotion of like relief from the audience, or cheering on as the main character murders swaths of, I don't know, be it Nazis is a good one, or
yeah. And to put an absolute scene to that idea, for me, it's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with the telephone.
Yeah.
And he's just smashing her head into it, and we're all cheering with joy.
Yeah, but, or when he brings out the flamethrower and just
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we're just hoping for that carnage, and it's just great to watch because we're all.
Tarantino's really good at that. Yeah.
But juxtaposing, I'm thinking potentially there is a fourth category, and I'm not sure what I'd call it. It's almost like slapstick or choreographed to an extent. I'm thinking like along the lines of Tarantino, like Kill Bill, where we've got the slicing up of limbs and all of this. It's not really at the forefront of it. It's again not really to evoke an emotion, but it's also not something that's to display. I forgot the second category.
I feel like it is the second. It's the second.
It might be
section.
action.
It's entertainment.
Yeah, I suppose it is definitely. Yeah, it just seems almost like a slapsticks part of it. It's a subcategory of it. But nevertheless, when we see gore on screen, it's different for each individual. I think we should try to talk more about this objectively. That's kind of what we're trying to do here, which is challenging, but we'll have a guess at it. But so okay, let's continue the journey. So we've got our categories. Which one is the best? And then maybe we can bring out some movies that we love, and we can talk about some things about these categories. That might be a good way to take it.
I don't think there is one best. I feel like all three of these can like produce pretty great results. But for me personally, the third category is the one which has it got the best reactions out of me. So yeah, but that's just for me personally.
Completely agree with you. I find the first category I mentioned, like, sorry to use these examples, but Saw, Hostel, they do not use gore in the same sense that the third category does, which is about creating that emotional response. And that it is shocking still in that moment where John Wick penetrates some guy's eyeball. It's very enjoyable, but you're not going to a Saw movie to just have that happen to you once or twice in the film. It's continuous.
Yeah, it gets trivialized to the point where it's no longer a selling point of the film anymore. Or it doesn't make the film unique anymore because it's so plentiful that it's kind of like That's my opinion.
I don't mean to backtrack because I'd like us to progress onto particular movies and styles of gore. But I just did think of another category, and I would like to call it realism or ultra realism. And I'm thinking of war movies. And I'm thinking of these particular things. They're not for entertainment, maybe for shock. But
they're still to evoke an emotion, right? It's part of our third category.
Yeah. I would say it's a blend of the three categories, though. It's definitely quite constant as well in war. In some particular war films, like Saving Private Ryan, and you definitely have a lot of it going on constantly. Yeah,
but let's not talk about this yet. But I think this is going to lead to another part of our conversation where we talk about how gore can actually be unnecessary, really, because you mentioned war films and I instantly thought of Dunkirk. Like, Dunkirk is one of the most claustrophobic, oppressive war films I've ever seen because of Nolan's ability to immerse you in the setting, yet it's PG-13 with no gore. So yeah.
Let's continue with that. Let's continue with that before we continue on. Let's continue with it. So gore isn't necessary. So I'd like you to explain how you what you exactly mean by this. Maybe just develop it a bit more, and then we can see where it goes.
Gore isn't always necessary. I think that's more what I'm trying to say, in that because that was also my reaction when I heard about Dunkirk, that it was going to be PG-13. I was like, how the hell are you going to make a war movie which can't have blood in it? It's kind of ridiculous, right? It's not going to be as impactful. But it was. I think it's one of the most impactful war films I've ever seen in terms of putting you there. And the same can be said about one of the most disturbing and weirdly disgusting horror films of all time, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's not a drop of blood in that film. And I think the point is that sometimes audiences and directors can fall into the trap of thinking that if they add more shock value, or if they add as much gore into it as possible, that it kind of will do the job of creating the depth for the story. But I think that it doesn't always work. Like a film that I can think of is Only God Forgives by Nicholas Winding Refn. There's a lot of violence in that movie, but it feels really empty and hollow, which kind of leaves you with the reaction of like, why did you have to do that? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like gore can be a waste of time in a movie or a detour, but sometimes it can work really well, but it's not necessary. And sometimes it can work against the movie. That's pretty much what I was trying to say.
I want to layer on this. This is a great point you're mentioning. I would also say, if you're going to commit yourself to gore, I would like to highlight, and to the individuals out there who actually practice, it is an art form essentially to create such detailed structures of gore. And when you the director, the producer, the team and writers create gore in a scene, I feel like you have to take a stand and make it very good, because if you don't commit to it, and it can have the absolute opposite effect, where it could look just very bad. It could just become almost campy, like, and
on a literal sense, like in terms of how it physically looks. Yeah, if you don't have a big budget, it can look like paint. Or
that's the thing.
That's why for indie movies, I don't really. I'm not an expert, but I wouldn't really recommend somebody who doesn't have a big budget to like make a movie around gore, because it can end up being kind of funny, which is not your intent. So,
definitely. And every time I've tried to theory craft a film script or an idea for a good film, I've tried to completely delete the idea of gore from it, because it's just something that is not really achievable with a low budget, especially if you're a beginning filmmaker. It's just not really achievable, because you need a lot of skill and time and artwork to do it. And I just I felt like that was the opposite end to what you were saying. It's like, it's not worth it sometimes because of the particular film itself. It doesn't need it. And on the opposite end is that you just probably can't service it and do a good job.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Also, now this is one of those rules of filmmaking. I don't necessarily completely agree with it, but for the most part, it's right. Gore should elevate the film. It shouldn't be the core of the film. It should elevate it. Because you mentioned that. You said that when you think of making a script, you remove the gore first to see if it functions the way it is without it. And I think for the most part, that's the most sensible way to go into making a movie, where gore, if you have it, elevates it. At the same time, there are some movies, like Possessor, for example, where gore is central to the film, and it actually works really well. But that's more rare. I feel like for the most part, gore should be there to elevate. But yeah,
I agree. And I was just recently watching Ridley Scott's Alien. I was rewatching it, and the scene, the particular one gory scene with the chest, is absolutely necessary, because it's just it hones in on the environmental, almost like honing depressing feeling you've been having for all this time.
And also, imagine if Alien up till that point was full of gory moments, like full of just the xenomorph wrecking people left and right. That chest burster scene would not be as impactful as it is without that. So
exactly, that's a very, very good point. So now let's continue back to where we were before that. So we were talking about, I wanted us to talk about exactly what particular movies we found to be great in these categories, because
we were on shock value right now. So
we let's stick with it then. So shock value, let's almost put it to the extent that films that are all about it, all about showing you the goriest details that they can throw at you. What should we talk about first?
Well, you mentioned Saw. I feel like Saw is a good place to start.
I was hoping we wouldn't talk about Saw first, but it's kind of
we kind of have to, like, it's
But before why is Saw so centered as the iconic gore film?
Because that's the
It
selling
seems like a
point of the
stupid
film.
question.
That's like the film. That's, well, except for the first movie, which the first movie was actually more of a psychological horror, a pretty good one, actually.
Yeah, very good one.
But that's just the first one. After the first one, some studio execs completely misunderstood why people enjoyed the first Saw film, and they were like, okay, we just have to come up with more elaborate, insane traps and make it as bloody as possible. And that kind of became the identity of Saw. It's just, that's what it is. It's just traps and people getting killed in like horrible ways and buckets of blood.
So okay, maybe this is because I'm ignorant, but why do people like it? Now, it's not to say that I dislike Saw, really, but what is the appeal, guys? What is it? What is the appeal of sitting down and paying as well? I assume, you know, going to the cinema or the theater to watch this for 2 hours of people just being brutally killed nonstop. What is the?
I feel like general audiences respond well to shock value, and because they respond well to shock value, what the marketers of the film hope to happen is that people start talking about, oh, hey, did you see the new Saw film? It's so bloody. It's fucking crazy, man. It's so disturbing.
Right.
And by that word of mouth, more people watch it. And so ultimately, the point of it is to ignite shock value in the audience. And a lot of audiences, shock value is enough for them because it's just like adrenaline. That's why a lot of people, that's why general audiences kind of like shitty horror movies, in my opinion, because they go into horror movies expecting an experience. They kind of go into the horror movie knowing what the film is going to be, and they're hoping to get as many like jump scares and disturbing material as possible for shock value, and so they can talk to their friends about it. I think that's what it is.
So
it's a social thing, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I see that point. So is the underlying psychology of it just that people's underlying human instinct is to watch obscene things?
Yeah.
And, you know, almost be brave about it and go and see what it's like. And that's all the trigger is, essentially. It's just to get people to face their biological instincts to want to see the most horrible things imaginable.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting because if you think about it rationally, it again is the idea that you're paying to watch something that's just horrible and obscene and horrible and almost blasphemous and just disgusting. And it's curious why people fall for, or I wouldn't say they fall for it, of course, to each his own, but studios seem to make a lot of profit of these things.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then, of course, you've got the opposite camp, which is along the same vein. It's Hostel. I would even chuck in the Human Centipede into this category.
Yeah.
And any others to add into this category?
I was going to say Hostel, so I don't know
Hostel.
if I can think of something else.
I watched an hour and a half of the first Hostel movie and I had enough. It was close to 3/4 of the way through. I had enough. I didn't watch 2. I didn't watch 3. I don't know if there was a 4th. I didn't watch any. I had enough. It's just senseless, brutal killing. I don't get it.
But I think that was the point of Hostel, is that when you're so rich that you have everything in the world, you become bored, right? Because you have everything and you've seen everything. And that's why money can lead to depravity, because then because you have the money to do it, you're going to keep on searching for crazier highs. And I'm sure that somewhere in the world, something like Hostel happens quite regularly.
Of course.
And I feel like that was the aim of it, but it wasn't really executed that well. Yeah.
Now that we've mentioned these 3 films, I would highlight that it isn't the biggest category of films, I would say, perhaps.
No.
Maybe there are other films out there that are less known. Of course, there will be, actually, but I wonder in the mainstream film world, is this a particular subgenre of gore that will continue? Because we've had Jigsaw's Spiral recently, which was like the last Saw movie that's come out.
I haven't seen that. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I don't think many people will as well.
Yeah.
Even though the cast seems pretty good with Chris Rock, that's quite good. But I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on the longevity of this particular subgenre of gore.
It's always going to be here. I don't think there will be a point where people get bored of it. There's a reason they keep on making them. It's because they sell. Yeah.
It's the same with anything, I suppose. Look at Paranormal Activity when they just replicated it many times to make the bucks. So
I think it might change once gaming becomes,
Hmm.
because if you look at the stats now, more and more people are gamers than ever. More people, like a large chunk of the population, play games, which is very different to how it used to be when it was a niche. And the more popular it gets, the closer we'll be to a world where having a VR headset is just normal. Everybody has it. I think the moment where you can interact with something like this and have it be immersive is the point where movies will no longer be necessary for it. It's not in general. I mean specifically for this subgenre, because there's a better, more efficient way to feed that like primal instinct.
I agree.
So, yeah.
And I would also mention maybe with an evolutionary point of technology, then gore can then go to that next level essentially. Because I feel like is there a point of stagnation? I asked that question kind of rhetorically, but we've had Saw movies kind of presenting the same quality of the gore for the last generation. But I don't know, where do you go from there? Like, say, for example, you want to outcompete as a studio to provide the best next gore thrill. Where do you go? I don't know. It's kind of, you're going to replicate it in some sense, right?
Yeah.
I think VR, which you highlighted, is definitely an avenue that would make gore a much more explosive force.
Yeah.
I can't recall if there's any fantastically well-made gore VR games actually, or
Not
experiences.
really. I mean, I know there's the Walking Dead one, which is quite gory. Yeah. For the moment, I feel like horror is really great with VR.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's something else. Yeah.
I was watching the Elon Musk podcast at some point where he was on Rogan's, and he was saying, "Where are you really when you're wearing a VR headset?" And I sat there listening. I thought, "What is he talking about? You're in your room or whatever, Elon." But he said, "No, really. If you think about it, it's not about measurements. It's about perception, right? So, what do you perceive with a VR headset? You're in that world." And I was. You could refute it, I'm sure, but
pretentious garbage. No, I'm joking.
The pretentious billionaire.
I'm sure eventually we'll get to a point where you might even be able to get PTSD from playing a VR game. It's just that at the current moment, it's a VR game just by nature of the technology at the moment. But I feel like if your brain can tell that it's not real, you won't reach that point where it completely messes with your perception. But as technology gets better, eventually. I mean, I think there's alternate solutions to things that we wish we could have from sci-fi movies, like teleportation or flying cars or whatever. For flying cars, we already have like tunnels and bridges, which basically do the same thing. But for teleportation, I don't think we'll ever be able to have actual teleportation. But if VR gets to the point where it's that good, you could restructure society around just putting a VR headset on and going to the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. And you could even incorporate smell and feel, and it'll be pretty much the same thing as teleportation. I think that's
truly, I mean, to me, that's terrifying for some reason. I find that terrifying that power and technology could get to that point. Even theoretically, I mean, we can all agree that's probably possible,
Eventually we'll get there. We are going to be living in a digital sphere, I think, eventually, which is
indeed, we'll be androids, essentially. But we should return to gore though. But go on, finish your point if you'd like.
No, I was just gonna say we have to get to the point where biological bodies no longer hold us down, right? Because until then, you're gonna just get fat and useless if you have to get to a point where your body doesn't hold you back. But
absolutely. Okay, that was really interesting. But okay, what if we now talk about entertainment with gore? So I'll let you start, Pete, because I started the last one.
I mean, where should we go? Tarantino does this well, and some R-rated superhero movies do this well as well. Like the recent Suicide Squad. It's not a particularly good movie, but the gore in it is really well executed. Or Deadpool, basically where you introduce really ridiculous situations, and the gore is not realistic. It's the opposite of realistic, but it's extreme in like a really dumb fashion, and you kind of just laugh at it and you eat popcorn and it's fun. That's pretty much what entertainment is. Or the fight between a B in Kill Bill between B and all the what the hell were they called? The Lucky 66, but there weren't 66 of them. Yeah.
There was like more, I think.
Yeah. And like it's just fun to watch, to put a character in a creative situation and limbs get cut off and people barf their innards out. Yeah, it's I feel like that's just for fun, and you know it's not real because of how ridiculous it is. So,
and what I believe as well, to go to a controversial point that for some reason was in the media for too long, when people complain about violence in movies, I feel like this is always the particular part of gore they're concerned about. The fun gore. It's not about the hardcore gore, to say hardcore, but it's always about the fun stuff because it's where people are thriving off it and just having a laugh and, you know, sitting back, eating popcorn and enjoying it. Right? Do you see that as well?
Yeah. Which is ridiculous in my opinion, but
it's ludicrous. Yeah. There's so many studies that state, like categorically, there's no connection or correlation. It's usually mentally unwell.
I feel like it's not the way you perceive it or the way that cognitively how you think about it isn't like, oh, look what happens if I cut somebody's like stomach open. Like that's so interesting. You don't think about it like some kind of mad scientist dissecting a frog. It's more like seeing somebody who has like a weird elbow, or it's like a body deformity thing. It's just something you perceive as funny. So
Tarantino, why is he so damn good with gore? Because, man, that's a good question to ask. I wish I knew the answer. Do you know the answer? Why is he so good with gore and violence and blood? And
I mean, like I said, he knows the lane of gore in which he operates in. If you know that if you know distinctly this part is supposed to be fun, this one's supposed to be serious, you have a better sense, a better like comfort level with the places you can take it if you know what lane you're in. Basically, if you know this is just supposed to be a fun thing, it just comes down to being creative. It comes down to creating interesting scenarios, and that's it. And plus on a technical level, he's been doing it for a long time, and he has his own shade of blood, of paint that he uses, and he's just gotten good at it over time. Yeah.
I mean, I would say, what would you suggest is his most famous gory segment in his films?
Probably Kill Bill. It's the Kill Bill one.
I was actually. It's not really the most famous.
Or the Reservoir Dogs with the earlobe.
The ear scene. There's of course also the death-proof car crash scene, which is not definitely his most famous scene, but it's most
not his most
glorious.
famous, but it's a gory one. Yeah.
I just like to say, if anyone has not seen that, I really recommend it. It's a splendid display of, and this was made in the 90s or 80s, right?
Yeah.
So it's incredible for that time as well. It looks very good.
Mm-hmm.
That was absolutely disturbing to watch, the death-proof car crash scene. It was truly.
I thought it was kind of funny myself, but that's just me.
I know. I found it to be like shock. That was really horrible. Okay. Yeah. I think it's the idea of the circumstance that you're involved within to have that gore happen. It's the car crash segment, and you kind of don't really think about what would be the immediate effect on the individual driving, right? But to see a tire, or was it a tire go up, Pete? You have to remind me. I think it's a tire just went across her face, and it's just like, it's just insanity. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's funny, or how the leg was flying around.
Yeah. So Tarantino's definitely. I wouldn't say he uses gore too much. Of course, Kill Bill's an example of Death Proof, but he doesn't. Go on.
I was just gonna say he doesn't use it constantly. He uses it in specific sections to elevate them. And then the media talks about it, and that's why people like associate him solely with that, because that's all they talk about. But it's not constant throughout the film. Like The Hateful Eight, most of that film is just like bad motherfuckers talking to each other until the end where it gets really bloody, but it's still just the end where it's like that. So.
So, with Tarantino aside, the entertainment factor, you did brush along the ideas of these like R-rated action movies like Deadpool.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking a little bit about the new Batman, and I was wondering if we'd see something like that in that movie. We'd see some gore
feel
in
like with
Batman.
Batman, it wouldn't be for like it wouldn't be fun. I don't know. I feel like it would be more for shock or yeah.
Not for fun, sorry, but for shock and
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the pleasure of it, for it being entertaining in
yeah,
itself.
yeah,
But
yeah.
obviously, Batman's code is kind of, I don't know if will they continue that. I assume they
I'm
will.
sure they will. Yeah, after everybody's reaction with
Reactions to Bale's
Batman v
one.
Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that one as well. That was worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. That aside, so I can't particularly think of any more examples that are worth mentioning, but this is definitely the most predominant form of gore that I see
Yeah.
nowadays,
Yeah.
which I would say is an acceptable medium to give off the vibe. I mean, it's good to see it still. What do you think about it? What do you think about it overall as a in the current scheme of how gore is displayed in media, in films? It being used like this, I find it effective. Ultimately, I don't feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's a
It's-
negative,
Mhm.
a net negative.
Yeah, no, it's good. The only thing I dislike about it is that, I mean, I would put John Wick in this section for entertainment as well,
Sure.
and that kind of stuff. I feel like whenever a movie like this comes out, like Mortal Kombat or John Wick or blah blah, people talk about how it's so like edgy and it doesn't adhere to what studios want, and it's like so cool and unique. But that really annoys me because it's not. It's everywhere. It's
Right.
nothing special to have it. It's just a given. But yeah.
Okay. So that idea, that's a good point as well. Let's talk about that a little bit. So you have this kind of audience that's already expecting it. They don't get too excited necessarily when they see it. It's in some sense because it's just so commonplace.
Yeah.
So you've got one class of people who are saying it's too edgy, man, or it's so
Yeah.
edgy, like it's terrible, or
Yeah.
maybe it's the opposite. They like it because it's edgy.
Mhm.
And you've got the other. I would say the majority of people are just accustomed to it now. That's
Yeah, it's
kind of the
just-
state of.
Yeah, R-rated films. It's yeah.
And where I'm going with this is to say that okay, well, if that's the case, then well, are they going to go more into the direction of making more gore? Can we? I know it's a small point, but it's like, are we going to see more gore in these particular films to then increase it? Is gore on a? Is it going to be more substantial?
No, I feel like it's always kept at a certain level out of fear of people retaliating. I mean, the media retaliating generally.
Right.
I feel like directors are always very conscious of how far they can take it without people starting to get their
So it
panties
is-
in a twist.
It is still a balancing act then, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though it's become accustomed and expected and all these things, there's still a balancing act. you have
Yeah,
to
there's
play as a
nothing wrong
director.
with that. I just don't like how it's implemented all the time. I feel like if you want to balance it, you should just include less scenes in which gore can occur.
Right.
And in the scenes where it can, it should. But it doesn't always happen. With John Wick, I feel like he's constantly fighting people. Sometimes it's gory and sometimes it's not. And
Yeah.
that kind of bothers me when it's inconsistent. I feel like if you want to balance it, you should keep it consistent but include less action scenes. But that's just my opinion.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's also so it's obvious, but it's conditional on every element other than that on the film. So what is it trying to do? Is it an action movie? What is it trying to do? Because then you'll choose the amount of gore that you're going to have, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's a good summary of the entertainment one. And the last but not least one is, well, we've drifted in and out of this one, but that's the invoking specific impact during the moment and during the scene. Any highlights and any particular points to talk about?
Many. I've already mentioned it. Possessor. Possessor.
Tell me.
It's a film made by David Cronenberg's son. It's an incredible film, which is about a corporate assassin in a cyberpunk world that is capable of that you kidnap somebody who is related to the target that you want to take out, and then you can implant yourself in them, in their brain, and control them. And then you create a circumstance where a circumstance where the person you infected, let's say, they become, it's just they become pissed off with that person and they kill them. So it looks like it was not an accident, but it looks like it wasn't an assassin who was involved in the murder. It was just something family related. And then so that's kind of the way it works. But the film is more than that. The film goes into the concept of identity and where the borders of yourself, really. Where do you start, or where do you end? What does it really mean to be yourself? How volatile are you? And how people are actually dynamic and not static. And they can change in ways that you don't expect. And
Well, I agree with that.
and you meet someone and you think there's something one day, and then you realize there's something completely different, and you don't know if they were always like this and you didn't notice, or whether something happened that changed them. So that's kind of what the film is about, and it's an incredible film. But it's a film that has a lot of wanton violence in it, at least seemingly wanton violence. It's one of the goriest, most disturbing films I've seen, and it's based around body horror, so it's particularly stuff which is quite. You're entering the territory where it's stuff where you kind of want to look away. I did, at least. It gives you goosebumps and all that. But ultimately, I do think that the reason it's there isn't just for shock value, but it's to provide information about the character committing the acts. Because the main character in this film, you can't tell if she's a sociopath or not. And you know, there's like an element to her which really enjoys violence. She's a sadist, but you're trying to pierce the layers, and by having the violence be as frontal as this, it gives information about the character, and it also adds to the whole ambiance and atmosphere of the film. So that's one of my examples. Yeah.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
What a great film. I want to watch that now. That sounds cool.
It's really good.
That sounds great. Yeah. Wow. I have a good television.
That works, whatever. Yeah.
But not a movie. It's actually surprisingly Dexter. I thought of one scene in the movie that really evokes such strong emotion. When he kills his brother, he hangs him. Spoiler, season 1, 2. He hangs him from like some sort of patient table, and he drains the blood out of him, and he slits his throat. And you see a little bit of gore. It's not too intense, to be fair, but it's just that moment was. I'm trying to recall what kind of sentimental feeling it gave across. It was a real harshness, but solemnness to it, because it's his brother. But examples for me, I don't actually have that many to mention, but
I have quite a few.
I'd like to hear them, because I think this definitely is the best form of gore. Like,
there's the infamous elevator scene from the movie Drive, where the main character releases all of his anger and the weight that he has put upon him and his sense of hopelessness onto this one person, and like just completely smashes a dude's face in with his foot. And like you can see the whole thing. But once again, that is just to show the predicament of the character, and to help visualize what they're feeling in that current moment, and therefore you feel more connected to the character. Another example is, I don't know where I would put this film. I've talked to you before about it, right? I Saw the Devil, the Korean one.
Yeah. We talked about it.
That's also, it's a movie about revenge, really. But it goes into places which are quite disturbing, and it's a weird mix between schlocky entertainment horror, gore, but also the one which evokes an emotion. And I feel like it constantly rides that line in an interesting way. Yeah. So
I keep thinking of television references too. It's the Breaking Bad moment with the bathtub.
Yeah, that was so funny. That was incredible.
Because that is a moment where you're on this journey, you're learning more about Jesse Pinkman, and like, even though he's a complete idiot and he's unlikable in a lot of ways, you start to like him for his charmish incompetencies. You know, it's just something you ride along with.
It's because he's like he represents a shade of innocence and purity in a world which is completely impure, which is full of horrible people, including Walt, who is a horrible person. And even though he's down like the wrong path and he's a criminal, he's not a bad person. He's just kind of like a child, a misguided child. And you know, you empathize with him for that, you know. And
in that whole situation, their entire emotion is just disgust, like, oh my god, they're like panicking with everything. And meanwhile, we're laughing and having the best time of our lives watching this scene.
I can't recreate it. I tried rewatching it. It's not the same. The first time I saw it, I don't know if I've ever laughed like that like other than in that moment. I laughed so hard. I can't recreate it though. It was just that first reaction. So yeah.
Forgive me for for continuously mentioning television shows,
That's
but
fine.
they have been a forgotten element in this. And even though we said we would just talk about movies,
Yeah.
I've kind of branched it nevertheless.
That's
Anyway,
yeah.
We have to talk about Game of Thrones shortly. I feel.
Yeah, sure, of course.
The gore in there was a lot. There was a lot. It was very. It was used a lot to create emotion and evoke certain important points of character development. But what were your thoughts on it overall? Its utilization of gore.
I feel like it was fine. It was very good. He was never there for no good reason. Well, for the most part. Yeah, no, for the most part, it was. I feel like sometimes Game of Thrones can go into the territory of our first section, where it's kind of just for shock value. But this is once again something which rides the line where it's kind of shock value, but it also has a purpose. I feel generally the gore in this show, beyond the like moment to moment specifics, is more to give us insight into the world of a Game of Thrones, to make us understand this is a very violent period of time, and it's a very violent world, and I feel like you need the gore there to evoke that.
Yeah, I think season 1 specifically felt that. I felt that a lot strongly with the ending finale to 1.
Yeah.
With the beheading, there was a lot of that really did cement it. But I wouldn't say it's, on reflection, the gore is very minimal. It's a lot of stabbing and cutting, but it's nothing explosive in the sense.
No, except for a few outliers. When I said sometimes it ventures into shock value, I'm thinking particularly of Oberyn's death.
Oberyn's death, yeah, that occurred to me.
I feel like that was completely just for shock value. There was no need for. I mean, this is in the book too, so but there was no real need for that character to die, or die like that at least. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting. It's the choice of the shot as well. They chose to show you the detail. So it's again that does suggest it's trying to just shock you, because they could have done a wide shot from far back, and you would know what's still happening with a sound effect. So
I feel like if it was trying to convey anything, it was trying to convey that he got cocky and he claimed victory before he actually got it. But yeah.
And that's the world that Game of Thrones is, right? That it's almost just a complete snippet of what it's like. It's like if you celebrate too early, you get fucked over. Yeah, essentially. So I think we've gone through, unfortunately, television too. But I think we could skip television. But movies, television is kind of collectively we've talked about the categories and how it works. I think it's been somewhat interesting. I think we have to mention video games though to see what,
of course,
if there's any comparative point, because I feel like there is an underlying discussion here about what we expect from gore as a society nowadays, and indeed the different types of levels of gore you can get away with in the mediums. So games, where do we draw any distinctive lines here? Because it's that's going to be difficult.
Well, in games, I feel like once again, it can be utilized for different things. Generally, I actually think that in shooters, at least, the reason why gore is useful is because it helps with immersiveness. If you see that there's an actual reaction to you shooting the gun and the bullet entering someone, if you see that there's a bullet hole or that chunks of meat fly out, that's a visceral reaction of interactivity. It helps with immersiveness because you suddenly feel like it's more real, because it feels, that's why games are so good, is because they feel dynamic. If there is a gore system, the game is more dynamic. I feel like in shooters, if there is no gore or if it's very minimal, it can really kind of ruin your enjoyment of it. That's just my opinion. Like in Back 4 Blood, for example, I feel like the absence of gore in it, there's blood like which flies around, but it's not like in Left 4 Dead where you could see limbs like getting removed there's no visceral impact without a proper gore system in shooters. And it's nothing to do with enjoyment of gore, despite what journalists want to say. It's just because it helps you get immersed better. If everything in a game should be dynamic or as much as possible, and that includes gore. That's my opinion. So yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, what last shooting game impressed me with gore? And I almost want to go back. Well, there's Gears of War, of course, but I would think shooter-wise, like a polished war game, I would say is probably Call of Duty World at War. Call of
Oh
Duty,
yeah, that one had pretty good gore.
because you would get a trench gun and shoot into the enemy, and the legs would just come clean off in the death sequence. It was very detailed. So that was a good example where it felt responsive and the immersion was there.
Yeah,
Completely felt it.
Mhm.
And it was kind of like, holy shit, like this shotgun is powerful. Like, did you see that guy's legs?
Exactly.
They're gone.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. That's another thing. It helps to make the gunplay feel better and realer, because sometimes in shooters you can forget that what you're holding in your hand over there is a weapon of destruction. It's really dangerous shit, and sometimes that can get lost if you don't have the right audio.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So you play games like now with the whole battle royale crap that's going on, which is absolutely crap, by the way. But nevertheless, it's just there's no gore system. There's no dynamic system where limbs fall apart. It's just shoot, the body falls ragdolls to the ground, and that's it. And it's just it's starting to make the guns feel plastic.
Exactly.
Almost.
Yeah.
Like BB guns. Like,
Exactly.
Pew, pew.
Yeah.
It's just so. And aside from the war games, though, there's a lot of gore out there. We are not going to be able to cover it.
I mean, I'm just going to mention the two best ones, in my opinion, or the two best ones that I've tried, or three, really. Red Dead Redemption 2, incredible gore system. Truly.
Really?
You don't think so? In Red Dead 2,
I know. It doesn't stand out as something I remember from the game. But then again, it's because it's
there's
a great
other
game.
things which are even.
There's a lot of good things.
But the gore in that game is really detailed, and it's also not static. It's very well implemented. I think it looks good. And in that game, what it does is that if you do something really horrible to someone, that ties in with the honor system, because when you see what you did to that person, like, it actually makes you feel like, okay, I've done something bad. This is really wrong.
I do recall now, like absolutely removing someone's head with a shotgun. I do remember that.
You can remove limbs too, and and it helps to kind of characterize Arthur's turmoil with what he does, and and then Last of Us 2 has possibly the best one I've seen.
It's exceptional. Yeah.
Last of Us 2 verges onto maybe a little bit too much for me, actually. It's a little bit too realistic. But
can I just talk a bit about Last of Us 2's combat system is so cinematic.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it verges onto almost the VR element of it being like just a realistic virtual thing you're experiencing. So gore in that game hits pretty well and pretty effectively. So without question. There's not much else to say. It's exactly what you'd expect from every shot, and every weapon you use has the responsiveness and does the damage you'd expect. So it just works.
But I feel like in shooters, for the most part, we have a good selection of games with good gore, third person and first person. I feel like what is not as good is melee. I feel like melee hasn't really been cracked properly in games yet, mainly because no one's interested. But I feel like you should. I feel like, okay, Red Dead once again does this like kind of okay, but still not that great. Punching someone, like, you should kind of hear and see the impact as well, and like you should get the visceral reaction of bones breaking or something of that sort, or if you slash someone.
It's getting exciting.
Yeah, I feel like melee.
Do you feel that underneath while we're talking about this? You get a bit excited. The gore.
But yeah, I feel like melee is somewhere where games can improve.
I actually completely agree, and I think we've had some games attempting to try to do it, like Mordhau and For Honor, and perhaps Assassin's Creed to an extent you could add into that thing. But I think Mordhau is genuinely the best attempt at like sword-based gore systems trying to come into play.
I haven't played it. From what I've seen, Ghost of Tsushima is pretty good too.
Tsushima's it's a fantastic game. That also has quite good gore. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there isn't much more. I agree.
I can think of one, but I can't remember the name. Do you remember? Because it's I still think it's not released properly yet. It's been like in progress forever. Do you know the name of that game with the fucking kangaroo? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Is it a kangaroo or is it a rabbit? I think it's a kangaroo. Whatever. It's this game with where you play as a kangaroo who just kind of massacres people. But I remember that there was a real focus on melee combat in it. I just can't remember the name.
Oh my god.
Please leave it in the comments if you remember.
Okay, a kangaroo murdering and beheading people. That sounds like a good time.
Yeah. Okay.
And then so we've talked a lot about shooters, we talked a bit about the melee, but you've also got games which are completely just full of it. And I'm thinking kind of like Dead Rising.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example. You have games like Resident Evil, which are taking the lead in a sense.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna harken to something else real quick because I just thought of it. I feel like another place where games can suffer is that there is sometimes a dissonance between what you do as an in-game character and what the character does in cutscenes. Last of Us 2 suffers immensely from this, but not only that, there's a lot of games which have morality systems in them. And whilst in-game, there is a proper reaction to that. In cutscenes, because cutscenes are static and they're pre-rendered, whatever, they're already there, that can create a real dissonance where you murder a bunch of people in the main game, and that's supposed to provoke a reaction, but in the cutscenes, the characters act like that didn't happen. Like they didn't murder a bunch of people. For me, that could really detract from a game sometimes. But obviously, it's hard to implement dynamic elements to the cutscenes and general story as well. But yeah.
Very challenging. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Last of Us. I would say, not to refute that, but I would say that they did add depth to where, for example, you were stealthy in a segment of the game, in an act of the game, then Ellie would then, instead of locking a door during a cutscene, instead of locking the door, if she was not stealthy, should move something in front of it in the cutscene. But if she was,
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the character. How
you're talking about specific character moments to moment scenes where the story-driven scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. With the problem is they're hard to change, I imagine.
Of course,
dynamic, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I actually agree with you that it's sometimes, especially when you play GTA, you kill like 30 people, you get the police after you run away, then you go, "What's up, Trevor?"
Oh my, that's a perfect example. With Trevor, I guess it kind of makes sense. That's why, for immersion's sake, if I was gonna go on a rampage, I always pick Trevor. But Michael, like killing half of Los Santos and getting chased by SWAT, and then just going back to his family home and just like,
what's that? But as we kind of mentioned, though, that these mediums have different qualities that can allow us to experience certain levels of gore. And with games, what do you think is more shocking, though? Like, this is something I wanted to quickly just brush over, is what is more shocking, where you're really immersed in a game that is very beautifully well designed, that then displays you a gory moment? Think Resident Evil Village, perhaps, for the latest quality of this, or something like a Saw Trap. Which one evokes
definitely games. Definitely.
Games.
Like, there's plenty of anti-war movies, which are very good, but nothing really worked quite like Spec Ops: The Line did with me to make me really think about war in that way and really think about what I'm doing within the game. There was a meta quality to it where it made me think about the source of my enjoyment for the game, just massacring a bunch of civilians.
Right. So in Spec Ops: The Line, you realize that you're killing loads of innocent people, aren't you? Or something like that.
Yeah, and it stems from making choices that you have to make, but still it really makes you think about it. And because I pressed the right mouse button to aim and the left one to shoot, and I technically killed them, I feel like that is more impactful just because it's interactive. Yeah, I think like in games, it's more interactive.
Just to add, the moment in Modern Warfare 2's campaign, I wonder if I just...
Russian, yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's not gory, perhaps, but you're killing a lot of innocent civilians. That it feels harsh. I mean, actually, in that moment, I just went. I was having fun, but I think I'm not sure what kind of point I'm trying to make here, but there's something to video game immersion with gore and blood and death that is so much sometimes worse than watching a film.
Yeah, because you did it.
You actually pull on the trigger, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, those people out there, and I know they exist because my mother's one of them, who dislike video games and they don't understand the medium. This is where I think people have that argument to disagree with you, because it feels so much more brutal and real to do the horrible things in a game sometimes than to watch it in a film.
Yeah,
you know,
games are a great medium.
They are a great medium.
Yeah, and they've been shown to be able to do what movies can with stuff like Last of Us. Granted, not as well, but
I disagree.
But they have, or Red Dead, for example.
Yeah. God of War, man.
But like, they are also capable of doing their own things, which movies cannot do. They're a great artistic medium. Period. Yeah, that's it.
I still want to talk a bit about Dead Rising.
Mhm.
I think it was a fantastic experience. The first game itself was almost an icon of massacring hundreds of thousands of test subjects with okay-ish graphics. It's a shame that it went down the hill it went down, I have to say. I think 4 was abysmal, 3 was okay, and then 2 was great. But yeah, I really...
Sorry, actually, let's go on a little tangent here. I have never been a big fan of Dead Rising.
Really?
And all of them kind of look the same to me. And wow. I just would like to know from you why the first 2 were better than 3 and 4, and what went wrong. Okay, I'm just curious because to me they all look the same. So yeah,
it's a shame you haven't played 1. Like, I mean, you have played 1, right?
I played 2, not 1.
Well, 1 in itself was not the basis of the game was not just to kill everything. It was a terrifying experience. It was really gritty. Mm-hmm. The environment was gritty, and it was, you're in a mall, locked off, and you actually had to scavenge for shitty things to kill zombies with.
Really?
And and there was the psychopaths that you would encounter were all just really goofy and scary and creepy. The environment felt a lot more desperate. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of improved upon the game mechanics to make it much more fun. Give some character customizability with weapons. You could then combine 2, but it made sense to some degree. There was some stupidity and fun, but then in 3 you could combine like a chainsaw and like a TV monitor and shoot laser beams. It was stupid. But in the first one, or the second one, it was boxing gloves and knives on there. You would just punch and it was cool. It made sense. So there was a lot of, it had like a very, almost like the Walking Dead vibe to the first game. It was very surreal, and you're in a mall, holy shit, with like thousands of undead, and you need to figure out how to not die. And
yeah.
You should replay. I mean, it's so dated now, unfortunately.
The first one is very dated, I imagine.
It is, but I remember I played it on the Xbox 360 back in, I think it was 2006, 7, 5, whatever it came out. It was a long time ago, but it was so much fun, and it was so scary. It was so cool. Yeah. So again, I think there is a genre where it is all just about massacring, and there was one game I wanted to mention, but it's really escaped me, and it's just about murdering civilians. It's just about
hatred.
Maybe hatred. Yeah. It wasn't successful, was it?
No.
No. What was it about again? Do you remember?
Hatred was about some edgelord, some dude with like really emo guy with a trench coat and with black long hair and with makeup, who thought that human beings need to be eradicated because they suck. And he just picks up an assault rifle and like tactical gear and goes around in a suburban neighborhood and kills everyone. That was hatred.
And this wasn't successful. Wonder why.
But the reason it wasn't successful was actually not because of the subject matter, because I actually think, despite the fact that whatever somebody could say, well, that's glamorizes school shooters or something, it doesn't really. It's more like comedic because he's just an edgelord. I think the reason it failed was because the artistic design was pretty shit. They went for black and white and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And because the actual controls and the gameplay itself was kind of bad, but that's why it wasn't successful.
You've also got games like Mortal Kombat. We kind of mentioned it before, the entertainment factor.
But
it's full of it, right?
That is very similar to the movie entertainment factor in Mortal Kombat.
Yes. Yes. And it's literally all about trying to, but it's crafted well. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's
Yeah.
much more about creativity, which I think is the selling point. It's not just about as much gore as possible, right? So it makes it unique and interesting and exciting to watch. And you do get a slight shock. I will never forget. You and I were living at university at the time. Do you remember when we watched the MK11 reveal trailer
Yeah,
and we saw
yeah.
Baraka rips
Yeah.
someone's face off, and
Someone's
we were both
face off.
like, "What? That's
Yeah.
crazy!" It was just
Yeah.
amazing. MK11's detail is exceptional, really.
Yeah,
To the
and
gore,
it's creative. That's the important part.
really creative,
It's interesting. So yeah.
really damn good. What's the one? There's one particular fatality that I'll never forget. Yeah, it's that one. It's the one where so Katana kind of cuts open the guy, and then she starts spinning, and
Oh,
then
yeah,
with
yeah.
her fan she pulls the guts out, and they keep coming and coming,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
rap,
yeah.
rap, 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 rap. It's so gross. It's so
Yeah.
good.
Yep.
Yeah, I really hope they keep making Mortal Kombat games. They are truly in of their own right, completely unique. No, there's loads of fighting games out there, but there's none that do the creative gore thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Sure. I'm sure they'll still keep on making them. That's for
I want
sure.
an MK12 already, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed with the roster. I wanted to see Ermac. I wanted to see Sector Cyrax. I wanted to see more characters because they
No, I mean
they
I
also-
agree. I loved the roster, but I also agree that I would have loved to see Ermac, etc. But I still think
Mhm.
well, the roster is still good. It's just missing
Yeah.
some essential characters.
They created
Yeah.
some great characters like
Garrus.
Garrus, but I didn't like there was a god character. I forgot her name now. I haven't played the
Oh
game
yeah,
in a while.
Cetrion sucked.
Cetrion sucked.
Yeah.
Jackie Briggs sucked.
I liked Jackie. I think
I didn't like Jackie. I thought she was bland. But I mean, Jax is amazing. You got like Jackie's version 2.0 to me. So
No, did you ever play her?
yeah, she had the fists and she had some
Yeah,
weapons.
I
and
thought she
stuff.
had like a fun gameplay style. But
To each his own. So yeah, I think there is some entertainment games that master gore creatively and effectively. You could add so many from Dishonored to Gears of War. You could consider I'm trying to think of other games. There's so many games, man.
yeah, but I think ultimately the point we're making in terms of the difference between how gore functions between movies and games. In movies, like we said, it's either for the entertainment value, shock value, or to evoke information about a character or emotions, or to add to the world or the ambience of the world. Whilst in games, you can have that too, but generally it's to add to immersion and to have a responsive aspect to the game, a dynamic one, where you feel the game feels better if there is a proper reaction to the things that you do in it. So,
or the creative element, which we've just
or the
discussed
creative
as well.
element. Yeah.
From throwing a bowling ball into zombies and all their limbs come off in Dead Rising to the fatalities that we mentioned. These kinds of things. Now, any other mediums, Pete? We can't discuss music. I don't think that would work.
I mean, there is a genre out there.
Oh no! I shouldn't have said anything.
I forget the name. I think it's called like Power Core or Power Tools. I forget, something like that.
Power Tools.
I don't know. It's Power Core. I forget what it's called, but it's basically where you use really disturbing samples, which can include gory samples of like limbs being cut off or whatever, and grinding metal. And it's not industrial, because industrial still has a musical quality to it. This is purely just for the visceral experience. And you can have just an amalgamation of horrible sounds which take you on a really disturbing journey. There is that.
And why does my body flinch up at the thought of listening to that?
Weirdly, I actually think visuals are good, and visuals are work really well, obviously, but I feel like sound can work even better for gory stuff like that, because even if you see I don't know, somebody's chest being split open by a shotgun, the sound of the meat flying around and all that is worse than how it looks. So yeah, sound can add a
I'm thinking of like a steak that you haven't cooked, that you just throw it on the wall and get like a flop, 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 like that kind of noise.
Yeah.
It's I don't know, it's really unnerving. It makes your spine jolt a little. It's just sounds are a big component to the core factor. Actually, something we have not mentioned much. but it is
Okay, yeah,
absolutely.
I just looked it up. It's called power electronics. Sorry, that's what I.
All right.
the
So
genre.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to experience it. I can't bullshit and say I'm not going to. I have to see what that's about. I have to.
Yeah, no, this is one of the things where it can show what music can do, the type of journeys it can take you
Yeah.
on. There's a really disturbing album. I forget the name. I keep on forgetting names, but there's one which is from the perspective of an actual real world serial killer that was active a while ago. And the titles of the songs are either places where he buried the bodies or places where he was born and all that. And it uses
Okay.
samples from him and from the cities in which he lived and etc. to kind of try to put you into the mind of this person. Now, for some people, that can be something you don't want to try. Honestly, even for me, I don't really go for that type of stuff, but it's more as a proof of concept of the stuff that you can do with audio and music. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think now we at this point of the podcast, we usually do our own.
Yeah.
We try to create our own little thing of whatever we're talking about, whether it be pitching an idea for a movie. What I thought would be fun, because I personally don't have a great idea for a gore film as such, unless you do. But what I was thinking we could do two things. First, we could state what our favorite saw trap is. And then two, we can create our own saw trap on the fly.
That's a good idea. Yeah,
all right,
let's do that. Yeah, unfortunately haven't seen that many Saw films. Well, I don't remember that many Saw films, so I can't remember my favorite Saw trap. But I'll think about it again.
I have one saw trap that I remember. I have two, but I have three actually that are very horrible. So, there's the reverse bear trap.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I'm not even going to mention it. Everyone knows that one.
Yeah.
The angel trap is a really good one. So the angel trap, it's essentially a woman who's stuck up on chains, and she has a rib cage mechanism that's metal digging into the center part of her chest, and it's going to fling open. Okay, yeah. It's effectively removing all her organs. It's not too deep. It might be surgically put in deep enough that it would just remove everything. So, and her objective is she has to put her hand into a little pool of acid that's just next to her, and she has to pull out a key to take it out. But of course, it's acid, and it's going to probably what's the word? Sorry.
What are you talking about?
Dissolve, yeah, all of her flesh and skin to try to get the key. And obviously, in the time she could barely get a finger in, it's that painful, and it just rips her. It's truly incredibly well done.
It's also commonly called the angel trap, just in case some people are confused. But yeah,
the angel trap. Yeah. And I'd also footnote, if I may, one more. There's a trap where you have to get into this coffin, and the walls are closing in. And I'm claustrophobic, so I fucking hate this. I hated this one. And the guy, I can't. You have to take a guess. Do you think the walls will close and stop you, or do you think getting in the coffin is safe? The guy doesn't trust Jigsaw, obviously, so he puts his arms out like this, man. And you see the bones splinter through. You see his face squash. It's just horrendous.
Yeah. So my favorite ones, I can also think of two. These are ones which to some people might seem like, well, these are pretty mild, but to me, these are a bit more effective. From the first Saw movie, the razor wire trap. I don't know if you remember it. The one with the suicidal dude who has to claw his way around to escape, and he gets caught in razor wire, and the more he tries to escape, the more of a wire cuts into him. And
that's brutal.
The gore was still not that crazy back then, but the reason I find it so effective is because I go by my fear stems from weird textures, not weird textures, but weird feelings of this sort, like the razor wire. Just having your head cut or your face slit. I mean, that's pretty bad, but it doesn't really make me cringe. But the idea of like the razor wire slowly cutting through you, and the more you try to move, the more it cuts into you and the worse it gets. Yeah, that I find that pretty disturbing. So that's one of my favorite ones, because that's why I like the first Saw film. It was simple but effective. Yeah,
I like it. I mean, I don't like it, but
yeah,
Jesus, yeah.
And the second one is very similar to this one in concept. It's from Saw 2, or is it 3? I think 2. The needle the needle, the needle pit. I don't know if you
Oh
remember
yeah,
the one where,
yeah, I remember that one.
yeah,
And the
yeah,
keys in there, right?
exactly, and she keeps on getting stabbed with the hyperthermic needles as she tries to swim to safety.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was back when it was a bit more mellow, a little
exactly.
bit. I say
Yeah.
mellow, but
Yeah.
that was, that was. If you're afraid of needles, that is the worst day ever for you. Oh my days! Have you ever met anyone who's afraid of needles? They freak out at the idea of a needle being in the same room as them. Seriously, I had a friend in school, and when we had our jabs, he was so afraid of needles, he would run to the other side of the town
Really?
if there was a needle in the same room as him.
Oh, poor guy.
No, it's like a real phobia.
Yeah, a phobia. Yeah.
Imagine that though. That guy sees that pit full of them. You got to jump in there, please.
For me, it's not specifically the needles, but like I said, the visceral quality of the idea of the more you do, the worse it gets.
The worse it gets.
Yeah.
So essentially, you are not helping, even if you try to help yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's almost like the Harry Potter scene where they try to go into the Chamber of Secrets. Just sit still and you'll get through. You remember that?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, let's try a hand at our own traps. Do you have anything ready to go?
No, not off the top of my head. I have to think a little bit. How about you?
I have a concept, but it's not put together neatly. But I'm happy to give it a shot. So I want to combine two of my favorite fears, because one of my favorite fears, that's a weird sentence, but one of the things I'm most afraid of is darkness. And I wanted to play with the idea, okay, let's put a guy in a room that's completely black, no light at all. Imagine there is a door that gets you out of this room, right? And then I recently rewatched Jackass 3.5, and it was where they go through a hallway with all the tasers.
Yeah.
And I was imagining, that razor wire that essentially you walk into it, it just cuts your limbs off.
Yeah.
Imagine there's just like a few of those along the room, and you've got to try to get to the other side, right, in complete darkness. Mm-hmm. That in itself to me sounds terrifying. That does to me, because you've got to try to obviously walk slow, but if you trip, if you move through the wrong way, then you just get your limbs off, just razor sharp, boom. And I thought that's a concept I thought would be fucking awful.
Yeah, that's pretty awful.
It's not gory, but like the impact of it. If you were to film it, it would be also challenging. I suppose it's in darkness.
I honestly can't really think of a proper one with logistics and everything. I can think of a concept, and my concept would be around see no evil, hear no evil, etc. And it would involve somehow gouging your eyes out with spoons, and cutting your ears off and your nose off. Yeah.
So you've only thought about a little bit of this, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of detail.
Yeah, but I can't think of a specific way you'd get in the situation where you have to. But
there's something about the eyes.
Yeah.
It's your most prized thing in your body. I mean, a lot of people would give both their legs up to keep their eyes. I would, if I had to, hypothetical, but I'd rather have all my legs, one of my arms gone to keep both my eyes.
Keep your eyes.
So that's why that trap was so successful. When I didn't even mention the detail of it, but when he has the reverse bear trap, he has to cut under his eye to pull out a key. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Yep.
Well, this has been the Red Party Podcast coming at you live. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Any final words, Pete?
Nope, not at all.
See you later.